What's up, TJ Grant here with Quad Poly, and today we're going to be learning how to make this animation. So a couple things that we're going to be learning today are we're going to be animating the slime. Two, we're then going to be using the duplicate 3D node to create a group of those slimes. And then finally, we're going to wrap it all together into a very fun looking scene. Down in the description below, I have included a link to all the source files. Go ahead and grab those so that you can follow along. And with that being said, let's get started. Starting in a brand new comp, let's go ahead and bring in the images that are going to make up our slime character. So right click, go to Add Tool, IO, and click on Loader. And let's bring in the slime base PNG. Now we could take this node and we could drag it up into a viewport. And holding down Control and using the mouse wheel, we can zoom in and out. And if you just hold the middle mouse button down, you'll be able to pan the viewport. Since we are working with an image that has an alpha, in this case the slime base PNG, go ahead and click on Import and just click on the post multiply by alpha. What this is going to do is that either A, sometimes when you bring in an image that has an alpha channel in it, this background may be white, or it's like a solid white. If you click on that, that will force Fusion to display the alpha. Or B, sometimes what happens is if you bring in an image, the edges of the alpha will be very jaggedy. They'll look very pixelated. And what this will do is that will help smooth out the alpha channel. Okay? So it's just a good habit to get into to take a look and see what's happening to your alpha when you are working with images that do have an alpha channel. Okay, so since we have the slime base in, let's bring in the other images as well. So right click, go to Add Tool, IO, and click on Loader. And let's bring in the eye base. And once again, let's go to Add Tool, IO, click on Loader, and let's click on the pupil. And now that we have all of the images together, let's go ahead and set them up the way that we set up this image here. So under the node, click on Import, and let's do the post multiply by alpha. And let's click on this node, click on Import, and click on post multiply by alpha. So now we have all of them loaded into the scene. So now that we have all of our images in our flow, we need to merge them all together. And the way that we're going to do that is by clicking the Merge tool up here in the toolbar, and that's going to bring in a merge node. Now, if you've never worked with a merge node before, it has a couple of inputs that are really important for us, at least in this project. One is that it has the background and it has a foreground. Okay, and it's pretty straightforward. So since we want the slime base to be behind everything, let's drop that into the background node, which is the yellow triangle. And then since we want our eyes to be on the foreground or on top of it, let's drag the output of that into the foreground. And now if we take this merge tool and drag it into here, you'll notice that these two images are linked together. Now, we have a problem. One is that the eye is really big, and it's not supposed to be that big. So you would think that I could just come over here and click on a tab and find some way to scale or move or transform this item. But this isn't where we do it. What we do is inside of Fusion is that you add nodes that are going to ultimately affect whatever is attached to the wire. Okay, it's a little bit different coming from After Effects. So the way that we're going to transform it is very simple. Let's right click, go to Add Tool, go down to Transform, and just click on Transform. It's going to bring in another node. So if you click and hold on this and hold down Shift, you can move the mouse cursor over a wire and release it, and it's going to connect it to that wire. Okay, so now I have this transform. And what this is going to do is that this is... Okay, so now that I have both of these in here, I need to get the pupils in. And just like we did the eye base, this is how we're going to do the pupils. Okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at it. And let's add in a transform node. Then let's drag it into there. And let's go ahead and create a merge node. Okay? And then let's select both of these again and hit Control C, Control V to make a copy. And we'll drag this node into the merge node as well. So since I've connected these together, we need to add these pupils into this scene. So again, let's use another merge tool. And let's drag the output of this into the background because I want the pupils on top of everything here. And so we're going to drag this into the background, which is the yellow arrow. And then we're going to take the output of this merge tool and put it into the foreground here. And then let's drag this up into viewport. Okay, so now you can see that our pupils are there. And just like before, pupil's way too big for the eyeball, so we can simply click on one transform node. Let's click on the other one. And let's scale and size and position the pupil to where we would want it. And likewise, let's do it the same to this other pupil. Let's change the size to 0.5 just to make it consistent. And position it into place. So now that all of this is rigged up, the next step is that I want to place this 2D graphic onto a 3D plane because there's going to be some tools that we're going to utilize that are very specific to 3D objects inside of Fusion. So the easiest way to do that is if you right click, go to Add Tool, go to 3D and click on Image Plane. And I'm just going to take the output of the merge here, drag it on top of the node or to the green arrow for the input. And now let's drag this up into a viewport. And if I pan around, I can pan, I can rotate, I can zoom. Alright? If this is your first tutorial, the easiest way to pan and zoom around a viewport inside of Fusion is if you hold down Alt and middle mouse and use the middle mouse button, you can rotate it. If you just use the middle mouse button, you'll be able to pan. And then if you hold down Control and mouse wheel back and forth, you'll be able to zoom in and out. Okay? So now that this is a 3D object, I'm going to spend just a couple seconds here inside of the flow because I want to clean a couple things up and make it easier for me to see. So if I come over to this image plane, I'm going to treat this as though it is the root object. Okay? This is the item that I'm going to most want to manipulate. So and I would like for it to also stand out in the middle of a very busy flow graph. So if I right click, I can set the color, and I'm going to set the tile color to a very bright green. Okay? And that's just going to help me see it in a mass of nodes, you know, as the flow graph does get a little more complex. But I'm also going to right click and just rename it. And I'm just going to call this slime root, okay? Just so that that naming convention helps me out quite a bit. The next step now is let's go ahead and begin to animate this slime. Alright, we are ready in 3, 2, 1. Now that we have our slime set up, let's get into the fun part, and that is animating him. So what we're going to do is create a walk cycle, or in this case, a jump cycle. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to have him jump simply up and down. And the best way to do this is to use the spline editor. So clicking on the slime root node, let's click on the transform tab. And we're going to be animating him only on the y-axis. And I know it's the y-axis because it's green. If you've used 3D software before, you will know that most of the software programs out there, the X is always the red one, the Y is always the green, and Z is always the blue. Okay? So with that in mind, we're going to be moving him on the y-axis. So over here on your y offset, let's go ahead and right click and click on animate. Okay, that's letting Fusion know that we're going to be animating this property. So if we go to our spline editor now, you'll notice that there are two options here, the slime root and the y offset. Go ahead and just click on those, and now you'll see a red line. So if you hover your mouse over the white line here, you can scrub the timeline back and forth. And you'll also notice that there is now a point here. This is a keyframe. So the way that we're going to do this is the first keyframe, I'm just going to have him sit here. Then we're going to move it over about 10 frames. Okay. Now keep in mind that we're going to just roughly block this in. We're going to be adjusting the time and the frames as we start to refine the animation, but for right now, when you're just starting an animation, go ahead and just block it in. Okay? So moving it over 10 frames, I'm on frame number 10 now. Just go ahead and double click and you can add another frame. Now the reason why I didn't move him is because I'm going to create an anticipation. Okay? We're not going to do it on the Y offset. Instead, we're going to do it in the next step after we finish making him jump. Okay? So right now there's a keyframe and he has not moved. Now we want him to jump up. And we're going to move over, and let's just go over to frame 25, or roughly 10 frames. Or sorry, 15 frames over. And let's just move him up on the y-axis. Okay, and you'll notice now that the value has increased. And let's just make this an even round 1. Okay, and we can zoom out of the viewport, just kind of center things up. Then we're going to move over 10 more frames to roughly frame 35, and let's set this back down to 0. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the graph editor inside of Fusion, if you middle mouse button, you can pan around. If you hold down the control key and mouse wheel in and out, you'll be able to zoom in and out. And likewise, if I come up here, I can left click and move the mouse, and this will expand and shorten up the timeline so that I'm only seeing a smaller amount of frames. Or if I want to see more of the timeline, I click and drag and go the opposite direction, and that's just going to give me more view of the editor. Okay, so let's take a look and see what we just did. Alright, so let's watch, and that was not very good. And the reason why it wasn't very good is because if you've ever worked in the graph editor, or if you've never worked in the graph editor, these are actually splines. Okay, and the way it works is very simple. When I create a curve, right now it's going straight to this point. Okay, so that means that the speed is going to be even, and then the speed is going to be even going down. But if I create a curve on this, now that's going to affect the time. Okay, that the frames go from this point to this point. So let's see. If I just press play, you'll notice it just goes straight up and straight down. But now if I add in a curve, let's add it on this side here. Now if you watch it, you'll notice that it took him a little bit longer now to get to the top. Okay? And we've created what's called an ease. Okay? Basically, it's going straight up, and then as the curve starts to come around to this point, it's going to slow down. Okay? It's going to add more frames or add more movements closer and closer together until it gets to this point. Okay? So when you have a point on a graph editor and it looks like this, all right, and it looks like it's a sharp 90-degree and isn't smooth going into the keyframe, that means that it's a linear, or it's just going to take straight off. Okay? So let's go to this side over here as well, and let's adjust this curve. Now you'll notice that that the handles are going to follow each other. You can very easily go ahead and break that parent by holding down Control and clicking that point, and now you can adjust that side of the curve independently. Okay? And you'll notice that this curve isn't straight. It's got a little bit of a curve down there. We're just going to have him go straight down. So I'm going to adjust this curve so it looks similar to that. And now, if we watch our animation, you'll see that it actually looks pretty good, right? It looks a little bit more fluid. It looks like, you know, he's taking off, he's slowing in at the apex or the top of the jump, and then he is slowly slamming back down to the ground. Okay? So that's one of the powers of the graph editor, is that you can make these type of movements very quickly and very easily without adding a bunch of keyframes. Okay? And of course, you can adjust this time. So if I wanted him to take longer to get to the top, I can move that over. All right. If I really wanted to exaggerate that, I could move that and then slam him back down. All right. Which is not exactly what we want, but you know, you can really start to adjust the timing on the spline editor and also adjust the curve. Okay. So that's one of the reasons why the graph editor is such a powerful tool in an animator's toolkit. Okay, so if you're not familiar with the graph editor, this is a place where you can experiment. You can move curves around. You can see, like, you know, well, what if I wanted to do this? You know, and you take a look at it and you're like, oh, that was weird, right? I mean, it's a great tool to just experiment with and practice. And you know, looking at this spline, we are able to just use 4 keyframes and then adjusting the curves, which gave us a lot more life to that animation instead of it just being straight up and straight down. So now that we have basically blocked in our animation, our slime has a pretty decent jump. Okay, it has a nice little ease. We have some anticipation that we're going to add here. He jumps up, slows down once he gets to the apex of the jump, and then he comes back down. Okay, so overall, not too bad. But now we need to add additional life to the slime. And the way that we're going to do that is very easy inside of Fusion. So click on your flow, let's go back, and we're going to add an effect that's going to help the slime look like it wiggles and jiggles, okay? Because if we want it to look like slime, it needs to wiggle, it needs to jiggle, it needs to squash and stretch, basically. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a distortion filter, or in our case, a warp filter. So looking at our flow, you know that when we put a node in, we can add an additional node that's going to affect the previous node. Okay, it's basically that flow. All right, this imported in, the next item is going to affect that, the next item is going to affect that, and then the next item is going to affect that, and so on and so forth. Okay, So what I want is that I just want the body to be affected. I don't want the eyes to be affected by the wiggle and jiggle. Okay? So the way that we're going to do that is going back to the beginning of our flow. We know that this image that I just dragged up into here was the loader. I'm going to add in a node that's now going to affect that. But then it's going to propagate throughout the rest of the node graph here. So if you right click, add tool, let's go to warp, and let's click on grid warp. Okay? Now it's going to pop up here, and you'll see a little preview of it. And what we're going to do is, holding down the shift key, we're going to drag the node into the wire. And when you see it highlighted, just let it go. And now it's going to be automatically connected to that wire. So let's go ahead and drag that up into the viewport so that we know that that's what's going to be affected. So with the grid warp tool, we can actually just click on these points and really start to warp and morph our image. Okay? Now a couple things, let's go ahead and undo these, is that first, it's always easier to animate with less points. In our case, this is far too many points. Okay, we want to simplify it, but we also want to be able to have enough points there to morph the slime so that it looks like it wiggles and jiggles. So inside of the grid warp node, come over to your X and Y grid size, and we can start to adjust how many are going to be there. So in our case, we're going to drag that down to 3 because I want 3 columns. And then on the Y grid, just drop that down to 5. All right. Now, for our example, that worked out great. Okay. So if I take this point, I can move it. All right, and still get some decent movement and decent warping. Okay. So the way that we're going to do this is we need to animate this grid warp. Okay. So let's make sure that our timeline is on frame 0. And in the grid warp tool or node, if you right click here for mesh animation, right click on that and click on animate. Okay, it's going to turn green because you're telling Fusion I want to animate this property. Okay, now that set a keyframe at frame 0. If you go into our spline editor, let's uncheck the spline root or the slime root, and let's click on the grid warp, and you'll now notice that there is in fact a keyframe. So let's scrub through our animation. If I just move this timeline over, you'll see him start to jump. Okay. Now the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to turn this back on because I need to be very specific about my animation. Since this is going to be a walk cycle, I am going to need the beginning frame and the end frame to be the same. So what I can do is come all the way over to the end, and I can double click this blue bar that's next to this right click here for mesh animation. I can double click that, and there you go. It's going to add in this keyframe. Now you'll notice that it moved it up here. That's because we're working with a 2D effect. Okay? This could be kind of confusing. So basically the slime root had a Y offset. That's dealing with a 3D object. That enables us to make accurate points on the spline graph. When we're working with something like a shape animation or a mesh animation, you're not going to get the positive and negative values. Fusion is going to place keyframe points on each point, but it's going to be building the graph up. Okay? Now, you still will get your splines, right? But the difference is that I can't move this up and down. Okay? I can move it left and right, but I can't move it up and down on the graph. As opposed to the spline root, Where if I just clicked on this, I can move this up and down. All right. So make sure our grid warp is selected here. And let's go back to the animation. So our end keyframe and our first keyframe are exactly the same. So let's come over till we are halfway. All right. And let's go ahead and add some squash, okay? Because I want him to squish down like he's anticipating. He's building up that energy into the jump. So let's just move this out. Okay, let's just bring that down. And we'll move these over too, all right? Because I really want him to kind of flatten a little bit, all right? So he's really flattened himself on the ground there, all right? Maybe bulge him out just a little bit there, okay? And then let's bring this down. And let's bring down these points here as well, okay? So he's really squishing down at this point, okay? He's building up that energy to go, all right? And you'll notice now, as we animate through this, that you can see that he is starting to basically squish or melt or whatever you want to call it, all right? Now, we need him to basically begin the jump, okay? So the easiest way to do that is let's just move these back. Now, they don't have to come back perfect, okay? They just need to come back, all right? Because all we're doing is now adjusting the shape. Like this is the point where he is really starting to leap, okay? So he starts off, he squishes down, and then he squishes back, and now he's really taking off. So let's move just a few keyframes over, and let's really expand him. Like he really took off, okay? So he's going to get really squished now, okay? And elongated essentially, all right? So let's make him a little elongated, all right? And then let's move a few keyframes over because I'm going to add some jiggle, all right? Like he's very elastic as well. So just a few keyframes over, I'm actually going to move these back up, okay? And it's okay if they get a little distorted like this. That's kind of what we're going for. All right. Let's bring that up just a little bit more. Let's really start to bring these up. Okay, I might even make sure that the curve's a little bit different. All right, so it's curving down this way. All right, so if we look at that now, he's really kind of brought up into himself. Okay, and now we're approaching the apex of the, or at least the height of the jump. Okay, so what I might do here is, since this is coming up, I may move this back down just a little bit more. Then I'm going to come over just a few more keyframes so that he's at the apex here, and bring these back up again. All right, because that's going to add a little bounce to his overall look. Okay, and let's just take a look at that from the very beginning. So if you'll notice too, the grid warp really is, it takes a lot to calculate this. So what we can do inside of Fusion is, if you come over to these buttons down here, you have the high quality, motion blur, proxy, auto proxy, and some, meaning that some things will be updated or not. Okay. What you can do is just click on proxy, and if you right click, you can set the value. 3 is generally okay. I'll stick with 8, And so now it'll update a little bit faster for us. Okay? And so you'll notice now with our animation that he does a pretty good job. He looks super wiggly, right? Very wiggly when he hops up. But now we need to have the same for when he falls back down. Okay? So let's take a look at this. Alright? So I'm going to move this over. So going back to this keyframe, let's move over a little bit. So now let's take a look at our curve. Okay, so now he is starting to fall back down to the ground. So let's go ahead and elongate him. Okay, we can change the radius of our magnet distance by just going here, and let's just elongate him again. All right, let's just bring that up, and we could bring the top one up here too. Okay, we can go outside the bounds here. And let's bring that up, right? And just kind of form him so that he looks fairly elongated, all right? He doesn't have to be perfect. We can keep one side over here and, you know, scale this in. Okay. All right. And all we're doing is just giving him a fun shape. Basically, like he is making his way back down to the ground. Okay. And then finally he lands. Okay. But what I want to do is that what's good in animation, especially in 2D animation, is that to really make things look like they smack. Okay. You'll notice that there's a few frames where he is kind of coming back together. But if you were to go back just a frame, and again, just elongate him again, right? And not have him quite so squished, but elongate him. When the next frame hits and he's okay, like he's, you know, normal size, that's going to look a lot more impactful, all right? It's going to look like he impacts the floor, like really hits it hard, okay? And that's kind of what we're going to do here, okay? So let's just get him kind of elongated again, and then bring him down, okay? So let's take a look at our entire animation. All right, not too shabby, all right? Not too bad at all. He definitely wiggles, he definitely jiggles, but there is one area here, and that's at the very beginning. I want that anticipation to be more, okay? And so just like with the hit, okay, when he gets back to normal and we have that one frame right before it, and then the next frame he hits, I want the same with the anticipation. I actually want him to squish just a little bit more, okay? So what we're going to do is go back to that frame and squish him down more, okay? Really squish him down. All right, and then I'll take off, and let's take a look at this overall animation. Goes down, get a little more. What we need to do though is take a look at this frame. These come out wider than these do, so let's make sure that this still kind of comes out a little bit farther, okay, than the previous frame. Okay, that's going to add a little more emphasis, like he's really gaining some energy there. So let's take a look at that. There we go. All right, and one more time. All right, that looks pretty good. Now, the next step is, since we have this animation, basically what we're going to do is we need to make it cycle, okay? Because I want him jumping over and over and over and over again. And with Fusion, it's very simple to do, okay? If I were to come over here, make sure everything is selected that you want looped. If I select all of these keyframes, and I come up here to this toolbar and I say set loop, it's going to add all of those keyframes down the timeline. Okay? And if I hit play now, you'll see it's going to loop forever, over and over and over again. Okay? And also, because this is a set loop, if I wanted to, let's say I didn't like that timing of that jump. You know, maybe I wanted him to go a little bit higher. If I just click on one point, I can move it higher, and you'll notice that all the loops respond the same. Because all this is doing is just it's instancing, or rather referencing, these keyframes in the beginning. Okay, so you know, once you make a loop like this, you can go back and refine it even more. You can tweak the timing. You can do whatever you need to in order to really make the animation pop and have it propagate throughout the rest of the animation. So now that we have the slime animated, where he's jumping up and down, we now need to animate him moving from left to right. Okay, so what we're going to do is on this slime root, you'll notice and remember that we created this on a 3D plane. But what we need to do is use a node that's going to affect a 3D object. And I don't want to animate on the x-axis here. I want to instead use a different node that's going to act as the movement instead of the slime root, because I want to keep this animation clean. So if I right click, go to add tool, go to 3D, and click on transform 3D. Okay, so this transform 3D is only going to affect 3D objects. You'll remember that we used a 2D transform back here, but that was only for affecting 2D objects. Okay, but now since we're dealing with a 3D scene and a 3D object, we can't use a 2D transform, we have to use a 3D transform. Okay, so let's tie this in to the transform 3D, and let's take a look at that. Okay, you're not going to notice anything different, but what the transform 3D does is that it allows us to move and scale and basically manipulate the object. And this is also going to act as the parent now. So this slime root is now a child of this transform 3D. Okay, so what we're going to do is we need to animate this slime going from left to right. Okay, so the way we're going to do that is if we look in our spline editor, go to our slime root. Let's just look at the movement of the jump itself. Okay, so right now our jump is approximately 35 frames, from frame 0, frame 10, and then all the way up to 26 here, and then down to 25. So how we're going to do this is it's going to be a little bit of trial and error. We need to move him going a certain speed. Okay, so on our transform 3D node, I'm going to go ahead and just move the slime up to the top of the grid here. Okay, because I want to keep things clean, and I really don't like the grid intersecting with the slime. Okay, but you'll notice that when I animate, that I didn't affect the jump animation by merely moving the y-axis up on the transform 3D. Okay, so if I move it over here, you'll notice that the jump animation still plays the same. So with that in mind, now that I have him on top of the grid, let's start to move him from left to right. So the way we're going to do that is on the transform 3D node, we know we want to move on the x-axis, which is the red axis. So right click, click on animate. Okay, next let's look at our spline. Okay, so under the Transform 3D, we now have the X offset, and its color is red. If I click on the little red icon here, I'm just going to make it a different color so that we could see what we're doing. Okay, I want to make it different. So we know we need to have him pause, because if you look at our animation, this is the point where he squishes down, and this is the actual part where he moves, and then he stops. And then he's going to squish down again, and move, and stop. Okay? So what we're going to do is, we have a keyframe already at frame 0 for the X offset. Let's come back over to the frames over and scrub to frame 10. Now I don't want him moving. Remember, this is his stationary spot. All he's doing is building up that energy to jump. So we're going to set another keyframe at 0. And then we're going to come all the way over here to frame 35. And that's when I'm going to move him. Okay? And let's just move him 1.5. Then let's scrub back over. Okay, let's see how that looks. Squishes down and he jumps. Okay? Let's do that again. He jumps and he squishes down. Now you'll notice that he is actually traveling back to his original position. We don't want that. So since he's at 1.5 here, he jumped and he squished back down. We don't want him moving back. Instead, what we want to do is come over here to frame 45, where the next loop point is at. We'll also set that to 1.5. Likewise, now that he's at 1.5, we want to move him over again. Okay, so the way we did that is he went to 1.5 there, he stopped. Let's go to the next loop point, and let's change that to a 3 so that he's further now. And then let's go to the next point on the loop, and let's do a 3 there as well. And let's kill this keyframe. Okay. He's going to jump again. And let's move him 4.5. Come over here, set another keyframe. Move him over one more. Let's make that 6. And you'll notice that the timeline keeps going up and up and up in value here. And we'll set it one more time. Then we'll just have one more jump in him, because we're only going to need about 7 seconds, or, well, this is more like 6 seconds here. We'll set that to 7.5, and we'll just call it done. Okay? So now if we go back and take a look at our animation now, he's moving from left to right and stopping in those spaces. Now here comes the fun part. We have the slime. He's jumping up and down, and he's also moving across the screen. Okay? Now we need to make the entire group of them. And we're going to be able to make use of a really fun tool inside of Fusion in order to make a bunch of duplicates. Now, for those of you who have a background in Cinema 4D, you'll probably be used to this. It's similar to the MoGraph tool, the cloner object inside of Cinema 4D. And that is, in Fusion, going to be the Duplicate 3D. So if we go to Add Tool, 3D, and go to Duplicate 3D. What this is going to do is it's going to duplicate all of these 3D items. Okay? So let's drag this Transform 3D node into the Duplicate 3D. And let's drag it up into the viewport so we can see what we're doing. All right. So with the duplicate 3D, what we can do is, this is the number of copies. Okay, so right now there are 2 copies. And if I just go ahead and start to offset it, you'll see that we have 1 and 2. And I can increase that number or decrease it. You'll see that it goes up to 10. Well, you can actually take that up to a higher number. You just have to type it in. Okay, I'll stick it at 12. All right. You can also adjust the Y offset, so you can have them go up and down, and the X offset as well, which is left and right. Okay. You could also do some pretty cool things with the rotation, so that you can make them spiral. All right. You can have some very weird looking animation there if you wanted to. All right. So there is a lot of power in this duplicate 3D. But the one thing that I want to do is I want to create a group of them, but I don't want them all in a line. So if you come over to the Jitter tab, this is where we can offset and create some variance in their position. So since we've duplicated about 12 of these slimes, I can come over here and I can adjust the Z offset now. You'll notice that some are moving closer than others. All right. I can also adjust the X offset. Okay. And that's going to add in some more variance. Now I'm going to go back to the controls real quick because this offset is way too much. I want to bring it down because I want them closer together. Okay. And now if I take a look at this, you'll see them all jumping across the screen. But there is one more element to this. They're all jumping at the same time. They're all in sequence. Okay. I don't want that. I actually want some randomness. All right. So this is another little powerful feature in the duplicate 3D. Is if I click on the Jitter tab, what I'm going to do is come down to this time offset. Now, the way this works is that it's going to take each individual element and it's going to start the animation, this entire animation that we've set up. It's going to start it based off of the frame number, but it's also going to be random. Okay, so if I set this to say 20, you'll see some of them are midway of jumping down. You also have some that are squishing and some that are normal. What it's doing is that it's going in here and it's going, well, this one I'm going to start at frame 20. This one I'm going to start at frame 60. This one I'm going to start at frame 5. You know, it's going to have a value of 20 some odd frames that it's going to choose from. Okay? I can set that to 80 and you'll notice that even more so some of them have changed. But now if I play it though, you'll see that some of them are hopping, some of them are dropping down, some of them are randomly appearing because they haven't even started on that timeline yet. Okay? They look like they're kind of spawning in. Alright, and so with that, that adds a lot more life as well as some randomness to the animation. Alright, that time offset is very powerful. Alright, so let's set that back down to 20. So now that we have all these slimes randomly jumping across the screen, we need to bring this 3D scene into a 2D canvas because ultimately we want to be able to frame these inside of a camera so that we can render it out into an animation. Okay, so the way we're going to do that is we're going to right click, go to Add Tool, go to 3D, and go to Merge 3D. I did not click on that. There we go. If I drag this into the Merge 3D now, this is just merging all of these 3D objects into a single scene. Okay? And we're also going to right click, go to 3D, and click on Camera. And since the camera is a 3D object, and I need it tied to this scene, we're just going to simply drag it into the Emerge 3D. Okay, so now they are all part of that one scene. So now that we have this 3D scene, we need to bring it into a 2D environment. Okay, we need to render this out. So let's go to Add Tool, go to 3D, and click on Render 3D. And what that's going to do is take this 3D scene and use this camera in order to frame it into a 2D canvas. So let's just click on the output node and drag it into the Renderer 3D, and let's just take a look at that. Alright, so now you'll see that we're back into a 2D environment. You can see the size of our output, which is 1920 by 1080. Okay, and that int 8 means that it's 8-bit. So if we come over here, we can set that to a float 16 if we want. That's just going to enable a lot more bit depth for our colors and for any other effects that we may want to use. And you'll also notice that there is a renderer type. For our purposes, we're just going to use the OpenGL renderer because the main difference is that we get a lot more output channels, but the biggest one is that we can start to use the accumulation effects, which basically means that we can use depth of field and motion blur from our camera. Okay, you'll also notice that there is a big slime in there, and that's because if you look at our camera, it can only really see this one slime. Okay, so if I click on the camera 3D node, since this is all part of one scene, I can start to move and manipulate this camera around. So I'm going to move it back on the Z-axis, which is the blue one. You'll notice that now I can start to really see, finally, what's going on and what's being framed. Okay, I'm going to move it up on the Y-axis, so I bring them down, and I'll also move them on the X-axis. Okay, and this is where you want to scrub through the animation. Alright, I don't really like that some of them are spawning in the middle of the screen, so I just moved them over. I'm going to move the camera over just a little bit more. Okay, and now you can see that they are moving across the screen. Okay, that's exactly what we want. Alright, now a couple things is, first, you'll notice that it's all pixelated and blur. That's because our proxy is on. Right? If I were to uncheck that, and it takes just a little bit of time to render, you'll notice on my cursor and my mouse that that ring is starting to form. Okay? This takes a lot of rendering power here, having all of these duplicates and the grid warp and everything. That's going to take a lot of time to render. So just keep in mind that you're not going to get a real-time feedback on some of these renders or some of these effects that take a long time to render. Okay, but now that we have this, okay, let's go ahead and play with a couple of different settings here. Okay, so clicking on our 3D camera, let's go ahead and scroll down to the control visibility, and let's just expand that tree. Okay, so we want to take advantage of depth of field. And the way we do that is that we can click on this plane of focus, alright, because we want to be able to see where it's at. Alright, and over in the viewport, you'll notice that a green rectangle has shown up, and this rectangle is going to show exactly what is going to be in focus. So anywhere where this green rectangle intersects, that's what's going to be in focus. And so under the plane of focus, you can come over here and move it. Alright, and let's just move it to first basic slime here. Okay, let me bring it over a little more. Alright, so what we could do is you'll see inside of the renderer that nothing's happened. Okay, if this is really depth of field, the ones that are further back from the plane should be out of focus, while the things that are inside of the rectangle, or at least along this same plane here, should be in focus. And that's because we need to enable the accumulation effects inside of the Renderer 3D. So if I click on the Renderer 3D and click on Enable Accumulation Effects, you'll see that it's starting to blur. Now, they look a little weird because our quality is not up. So let's just change that to 12. All right. That makes it look a little better. Let's just bring that up a little bit more. Say 24. All right. But now we have the amount of depth of blur. Okay. This is sort of like your aperture. And I can increase it. All right, if I really want a shallow depth of field, or decrease it if I don't want that shallow of one. And in our case, I'm going to bring it down because I don't want it that much. I want some, but not a whole lot. Okay? So now this one, since it's the furthest back, is more out of focus, and this one, since it's resting right on the plane, is in focus. So now that we have finished the animation of the slime, and we have added some duplicates of the slime, let's go ahead and finish up the rest of the scene. So we want to add a ground plane, we want to add some grass, some trees, a background, and of course some sky. So let's go ahead and make that plane first. So I'm going to go in here, Add Tool, go to 3D, and just click on Shape 3D. And if you take a look at it, it's just going to be a plane. So let's merge that into our 3D scene. And let's take a look at the entire scene together now. And you'll see that the plane is sitting right there. So if we come over to our Transform node inside of the Shape 3D, in that Transform tab there, let's rotate it -90 on the x-axis. And then let's scale it up. And let's go up even higher. So we can just go ahead and manually type that in. Alright. And we'll also change its color. So if we click on the material tabs, we can click on pick. And let's just give that a green for a grassy type of texture. So now I want to add some grass into this scene. So let's load in our grass image. So Add Tool, IO, and go to Loader. And click on Grass PNG and click on Open. And then let's take a look at this. Remember, we're working with an alpha image, and you'll see some aliasing along the edge here where that alpha is not clean. So if we just click on the Import tab and then click on Post Multiply by Alpha, that's going to clean up that edge. So now that I have this 2D image, I want to bring it into the 3D world so that it will live within this space. So just like we did with the slime, we're going to add it to an image plane. So right click, Add Tool, go to 3D and Image Plane. And here we'll connect the output, just drag it on top of the node. And then, because this is now a 3D object, we're going to just drag it right into the Merge 3D node. And then if we just take a look at the Merge 3D node, you'll see that our grass is in there. Now, that just adds one piece of grass. So just like the Duplicate 3D tool with the slime, we're going to do the exact same process. So if I right-click, Add Tool, go to 3D and click on Duplicate 3D, I'm going to grab that node, hold down Shift, highlight that wire, and let it go. And now I can very quickly duplicate all of this grass. So just by going into the duplicate field, I can increase the amount, and let's increase the Z offset. All right, and you'll notice in this viewport right here that I am able to offset the amount, but I like a little bit of randomness, so I can jitter the Z offset, and I can also jitter the X offset. All right. So I can get some more grass in there. And on top of all that, I can even jitter the scale. So if I wanted to have some of them bigger while some of them are smaller, I could just affect the scale of each one of those. And I want more than 6 copies, so I'm just going to drag this up. And let's make that about 30. And they're getting a little big, so let's decrease the scale of those. So now we also have the grass kind of interfering with the graphics. I don't want that grass interfering with the front slime, so I could just take this and move it back. Right, and I can even take the image plane itself, move it back out of the way, so that not at all interfering a whole lot with the slime. And then we're going to come back to the duplicate 3D, and I'm just going to offset it a little bit more in the x-axis because I don't want that many in this viewport. So now I want to add some trees to this scene. So just like with the grass, we're going to right click, add tool, go to IO and click on loader, and we're going to click on our tree image and hit open. And remember to click on import and post multiply by alpha. Then right click, add tool, 3D image plane, because we're going to put it onto a 3D object. So take the output and drag it onto the image plane. And then let's take the image plane and drag it onto the merge 3D. And it is now in our scene. And so I'm going to come over while in the image plane node. I'm going to go to our transform tab, and I'm just going to adjust the scale and move it up on the y-axis. And then on the z-axis, the blue one, I'm just going to move it back out of the way. And then, just like with the grass, we're going to duplicate it. So add tool, 3D, and duplicate 3D. And we will hold down shift while dragging the node, highlight the wire, and let it go. And now in our duplicate 3D node, we can change the probability. I'm going to do like 7. And then we're going to jitter the Z offset. So that's going to add more. And then we'll also jitter the x-axis, or x offset. And then we'll also adjust the scale, because I do want some of them bigger and some of them smaller. All right. And then I noticed that we can see through the bottom there, and that's because this plane here is not far enough back. So I can just click on it, and you'll notice that it highlighted the node down here too. And on the green axis, or the y-axis, we're just going to move it back. Alright, so that it intersects, and it looks like it's behind the tree now. Okay? And then I want to adjust those trees as well, just a little bit more, just so that they're not all in the way. Okay? And then the last thing that I want to do is I want to add in the background, or at least the mountain range. So right click, add tool, go to IO, click on loader. This time we're going to do background underscore R1, hit open. And then likewise we are going to make that into an image plane. So add tool, 3D, image plane 3D, and drag that into there. And we'll merge it once again into the merge 3D node there. And you'll notice that as the flow starts to get a little more complex and you're starting to add a lot of these together, you can come over to any wire, and if you hold down Alt and you click on it, it's going to create a little joint. So I can just create a joint and kind of clean that up. Alright, so now that we have our background in here, let's go over to the transform node and let's scale that up. Alright, you may have to manually type in, and then let's move that back, and we'll move it up on the y-axis. There we go. Up out of the way. And we'll move it over. And we'll have to scale it up a little bit more. Maybe we'll just do an even 17 there. And let's scale it down. Or move it down. Alright, so that looks like a little bit of a mountain range. And let's go back to our tree. And all I'm going to do is take the image plane and I'm just going to adjust it because I do want to see a little bit more of the mountains. So I'm just going to move it over so we can tell that there's some mountains behind there. So now all that's left is we need to create some sky for the background. And it's pretty straightforward. All we're going to do is we're going to create a merge node. And because everything is being rendered now to this renderer node, okay? All this is essentially being tied into the render node. All of what we have done with the slime, the animation, and all of these objects that are merging into the 3D scene, it's being rendered out. And now we are dealing with a 2D image. So that means we're going back to using some 2D tools. So we can use a normal merge node. So the way we're going to create the sky is pretty simple. First, we're going to make a background node. And in the merge node, you'll notice that there's the background and the foreground. And all we're going to do is drag it into the background. And then we're going to drag this into the foreground. And let's drag this up into the viewport so we can see what we're doing. And then in the background, all we got to do is we have some options here for gradients and solid colors. Let's just click on the linear vertical, and on the top color just choose a sky color, and on the bottom we'll also choose a lighter one for the haze. So now we just have one more little task to do, and that is we need to render it out. So right click, add tool, go to IO and click on Saver. Now this is going to bring up a dialog box, and all you're going to do is go to the location where you want to save it. We'll just go to renders, and then we'll click on slime, final, and you can choose what type of file you want to do. If you want to do PNGs for like a PNG sequence, you can set it here. But for our purpose, I'm just going to do a QuickTime movie, and just do .mov. Click on save. And then inside the saver node, what we want to do is connect this merge tool, or this merge node, since that is the final node that we have brought everything together now. The renderer 3D, the last little background for the sky, and now we're going to save everything to the saver node. Alright, and so over here in the saver node, it's all pretty straightforward. What kind of output format do you want? In this case, we want a QuickTime movie. The file name, we just set that. Okay, but you can also click on Browse, and that will bring up the same dialog box. You can come over to the format and choose your compression and your quality, frame rate, whatever it is that you need to do to edit that. Okay? And then finally, since we have our saver set up, we have our format and the type of file that we want to save, all we need to do now is click on render. Okay, so in the render dialog, the one thing that we want to do is make sure that there are a few things that we need set before we start it. Okay, one, notice your frame range. We have 1,000 frames of animation. I don't need 1,000 frames of animation. All I need is 300. Okay, so with that in mind, let's just hit cancel and come over to your timeline here, and we'll just change that to 300. That's going to be the renderable area. Okay, and this will also display the amount of frames in the timeline. Okay, now that we've set the frame range, we also need to make sure that we have a couple of options down here selected. One is that we want to make sure high quality is set, okay? Because we want to make sure that this image looks really nice and clean, okay? The other setting is inside of Render 3D. When you're using the OpenGL, you're going to have the super sampling. And this is for high quality only. And you'll want to make sure that your sampling rate, you can actually change that down to 5. Doesn't need to be super high. You just need to kind of make sure you're looking at your scene to notice whether or not things are smooth or not. And you'll notice that in this case it is not. Okay, that doesn't look smooth. It's very pixelated. So if I click on go to output channels, RGBA, and this little checkbox right here, SS, stands for super sampling. Go ahead and click on that, and there you go. It'll smooth everything out. So now that we have the high quality set up and we have our super sampling rates all ready and good to go, we have our accumulation effects on, we have our depth of field and the quality and everything ready to go. Now we can click on render. And you'll notice our frame range now is 300 frames. We have a final configuration here, and all we have to do is click on start render and then wait. Well, that does it for our tutorial today. I hope you learned a lot about animation inside of Fusion. If you would like to stay updated on when I release new tutorials, please like and subscribe to this channel. And with that being said, stay inspired, keep pushing those pixels, and I'll see you on the next tutorial.